Hi, welcome to our analysis and decision-making process for option one. We are group 6, and this is our final project. Before we begin, I'd like to start off with our research goals. Essentially, what we were trying to do is figure out how promotional markdowns are related to overall sales. How will external variables such as weather, fuel costs, unemployment, and cost of living have an effect on the relationship between markdowns and overall sales. And we've done this per city. And our hope is that this research will be able to help us understand what kind of data we're working with and what potential changes can be made within the business to increase sales and, make the business more efficient and effective. Our research continued slide is about the main purpose of what we're trying to do is to isolate the variables that cause a positive correlation between markdown and sales and focus our attention on those variables as potential opportunities to improve the business overall and drive more traffic to stores, ultimately increasing sales. The intended outcome is to be able to help the executives make a crucial business decision based on our data and analytics, which is basically, should we close this store, should we open it, increase markdowns, or whatever the case may be. Some of our research goals are to hope that this benefit of conducting this analysis will improve sales, isolate the most impactful variables within the business, strengthen the company's business, and improve its reputation. Essentially, we want to be able to determine whether there's a correlation between markdowns and overall sales, and how we'll be able to use that information to our benefit. Ultimately, business executives will be able to decide whether the promotional markdowns are a success, and if not, what are the next steps they should take in order to improve the overall business's performance and sales and whatnot. Our project hypothesis, which is a main section of our project, is divided into two, the null and the alternative. Our null hypothesis was overall sales will not be affected by promotional markdowns because the weather, fuel costs, unemployment, and cost of living will impact consumer spending. And an alternative hypothesis was overall sales will be affected by the promotional markdowns because the weather, fuel costs, unemployment, cost of living will not impact consumer spending. Essentially, we're saying, are things such as a snowstorm going to affect whether or not consumers or customers will take advantage of a promotion, thus impacting overall sales? That's what we're trying to figure out, and we're going to be testing all those different variables as mentioned on the project hypothesis against each other by themselves to figure out the strength relative to overall sales and promotional markdowns by the city in which they belong. Our data preparation slide is essentially how we're going to analyze our data, and we're going to do this by weekly sales from our international locations in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York to determine the overall impact of promotional markdowns on sales. And again, we'll be doing this by looking at the external factors such as weather, fuel costs, unemployment, and cost of living to make our final assessment and recommend a go-forward strategy. Continuing on with that, there are 8 variables, 5 markdowns that we've grouped into one, that will be used in our analysis that are both nominal and scale. The nominal variables consist of our 4 store locations and include holidays as a measurement. The stores are a primary factor in analysis as we will be assessing each location to determine the viability of the promotional markdown. The scale variables, which are the remaining categories, will be used towards the same goal. The result of this data analysis will help us to defend against our objections, prove or reject our hypothesis, determine if there are any limitations to our conclusions, and ultimately determine the best course of action for the company, and giving, proper information to our business executives so they can make a good decision. Some important variable features are there are 5 total markdowns per week. The assumption is that each markdown is the same throughout each week and every store. There's holidays. Since the stores all differ in country locations, they will all have different dates for their observed holidays. Temperature. Warmer temperature could lead to more foot traffic than colder temperature. Concerns regarding data. We've been given this data set, so we took some time to go over it and identify some type of problems that we've seen with it. And some of the things that we came about were the data doesn't specify what the markdowns were for, or if they were the same across each week, clothing, sporting goods, etc. And we found it unusual that unemployment is significantly lower in New York than the other 3 locations. What factors into unemployment rate in those other 3 countries? So what did they use to analyze that? Those are just some things that we found that were interesting or concerns regarding the data, which could impact your answer or our answer. And our steps to prepare the data for our analysis was we were going to clean it up, find what is useful in order to draw a more accurate conclusion, and determine how the information can be misleading, and create new variables from existing data. An example of this is the differences in week 1 sales between all 4 locations. Beginning with our analysis introduction, we conducted a frequency test. In order to test our hypothesis, we'll conduct various tests to figure out what the strengths of those variables are, the promotional markdowns, weather, fuel costs, unemployment, and cost of living will have on each of their respective overall sales. And as you can see here, we have some descriptive statistics with a little bit of skewness, so we can see how the data is weighted, some averages, and of course the sample, which was 208, and all of them were used. On that previous slide that we had shown there, we thought it would be useful to display all of these variables that are in question within this hypothesis, as well as the relative mean, sums, ranges, etc., by conducting that frequency analysis. These descriptive statistics will help us understand in our later tests how the data fits within the averages and ranges that are around. It's important to note that for the explore and frequency analysis, all 208 examples were used. Furthermore, based on the descriptive statistics, we can state that markdowns are heavily skewed. Continuing on with this frequency analysis, our finding section, we wanted to determine what the impacts were those variables had on overall sales on a per store basis. Based on those descriptive statistics seen previously, we are able to conclude that fuel price has a very low standard deviation, meaning there is not dispersion or scatter, and the data tends to be reflective of the mean. It also had very low variance among its data, indicating that the data tends to be very close to each other and the mean. This can also be said about the unemployment rate. This cannot be said about the temperature, CPI, markdowns, or total sales. The next slides will feature select images from the analysis conducted. Now these images are here, I guess, to assist graphically visualizing what we had just talked about. And I chose these images specifically, or we chose these images specifically because they show that there isn't normality within the markdowns, the total sales, fuel prices, and temperature. Now, although temperature does depict a nice bell curve, the remainder don't, and you could see that specifically markdown and total sales are heavily skewed. And you can see that based on the tails. On the previous slide, it's important to note that these are the most significant trends that we were able to determine, which have been displayed graphically, as I mentioned before. Both temperature and fuel price had significant outliers within the dataset. Temperature has a somewhat normal curve, but the remainder do not have a normal data curve. In the image depicting the markdown, we have chose markdown 5 as it was the most pronounced, but the other 4 markdowns feature the same data curve. What this tells us is that there are a large standard deviation. The average was around $4,500, and that a large majority of the markdowns were between the $0 and $10,000 range. This was seen across all 4 markdowns. It is evident that markdowns were most effective in the lower region of the ranges, meaning that a large majority of the respective store sales would be accounted for from the lower markdowns. Both total sales and markdowns 1 to 5 are positively skewed, which means that total sales were between 0 and 50,000, and markdowns were more effective as smaller sales rather than large amounts, as there are many outliers within the data across the 4 stores. And upon conducting that Explore analysis, the following was determined. Temperature for stores 1, 3, and 4 had significant outliers. Fuel for stores 1 to 4 was relatively identical, although there was some outliers. The data made a good representation of a bell curve or normality curve. Markdown 5 for stores 1 to 4 was not a good representation of a bell curve or normality. And total sales for stores 1 to 4 had significant outliers and did not depict normality within the data. Next is our correlation analysis. As you can see here, we did a correlation analysis, and based off the scatter plot and table correlation analysis, all markdowns 1 to 5 have a significant positive correlation with total sales, with markdown 1 having the strongest positive correlation, 0.701, and markdown 5 with the weakest at 0.361. The closer to 1, the stronger the correlation. And you can see that based graphically. And our correlation analysis continued. On the previous slide, 2 slides, we tested the correlation between each markdown, 1 to 5, and total sales. Based on the scatter plot and tables, we were able to determine that all markdowns 1 to 5 had a significant positive correlation with total sales. Markdown 1 had the weakest positive correlation, and markdown 5 with the weakest. Strongest was markdown 1, and markdown 5 was the weakest, as we had previously discussed. Based off the scatter plot and table correlation analysis, it shows that fuel price, temperature, and CPI all have a significant negative correlation with total sales, but not a significant level, 0.075. Holiday is the only other variable besides markdown that has a significant positive correlation with total sales. Out of these variables, holiday, the strongest correlation at 0.378, and unemployment had the weakest, negative 0.124. None of the correlations are very strong because we know that the closer the number is to 1 or negative 1, the stronger the correlation. And of course, these were images shown that represent what I was just explaining. And then, of course, we have our linear regression analysis. A linear regression analysis will determine if there is a relationship between promotional markdowns and total sales. This page reflects the roadmap used for the analysis. As you can see here, it's a little bit of an explanation of what our dependent variable is, our independent variable, our null, alternative, and our alpha, of course. Our regression model is a simple linear regression, as it only has one predictor. The R of 0.000 indicates that total sales, which was our independent variable, has little variance in the store dependent variable, which is not a significant amount. Thus, P was greater than 0.05. As you can see here, the linear regression analysis reflects that there was no relationship. Therefore, the null hypothesis in this analysis is rejected. The analysis also reflected some heteroscedasticity, meaning that it violates homoscedasticity. Next, we conducted an ANOVA and EXPLORE analysis. By using an ANOVA analysis, first we went ahead and used the EXPLORE feature by setting total sales as the dependent and store as the factorized. By doing the EXPLORE analysis, we look at the skewness and kurtosis of each store and look to see if they are acceptable or within acceptable limits. With all the skewness above +1, this determines that the distribution is highly skewed. And then, of course, in a test of normality, we would look at the significance of the Shapiro-Wilk test and see if it's greater than 0.05. Here we have the actual ANOVA test, and in the between subject factors, we can see the number of factors on each store. In the descriptive statistics portion, we see the means of each store. On the Levene's test of equality of error variances, we look for the test to be non-significant and its homogeneity. With the significance all below 0.05, it shows that there is a significance. The test of between subject effects, we look at the store column and its significance, and we look to see if it's lower than 0.05. And since it is, we determine that total sales, depending on markdowns, is different at each store. We have enough information to reject the null hypothesis. Here you see a pairwise comparison, and we're able to compare each store to the other, and the only two that are non-significant are store 2 to store 4 with a significance of 0.755. All other were significant. And then, of course, we get to our decision-making solutions. What the analysis is telling us. The analysis helped us to reject the null hypothesis. We can state that the variables tested will impact consumer spending. The analysis also helped us to see the relationships between the different variables and the effect they would have on overall sales when either combined or on their own. And then, of course, we used a frequency, correlation, regression, explore, and ANOVA test. What were our findings? The findings show that we can reject the null hypothesis, although all variables were correlated with total sales. Markdowns had the strongest correlation out of all the variables. What are your results? All the results can be found for each of the tests run: frequency, correlation, linear, regression, and ANOVA, which shows that the strongest variable to have an impact on total sales was markdown 1. And then, of course, we get to our final recommendations. Markdowns are more effective as smaller sales rather than large amounts. However, markdown 1 is recommended as it has the strongest impact on total sales. Research suggests that temperature also impacted total sales for several of the stores, so it's recommended to conduct retail events during warmer seasons as a draw for customers. Holiday is another factor of total sales. Therefore, a 12-month holiday promotional campaign is suggested that includes all the major holidays in each market, with cultural diversity considerations for the following: Dubai, 10 holidays, several religious in nature and has specific requirements. Munich, 13 holidays, several also religious in nature. And then, of course, we get to our conclusion. As a result of the analysis, we can conclude that we are rejecting the null hypothesis, that overall sales will not be affected by promotional markdowns, because the weather, fuel costs, unemployment, and cost of living will impact consumer spending. We would encourage all 4 stores to discontinue the markdowns on week 4 and 36, holidays, since little to no impact occurred in sales during those days. Major impact on sales were found only on week 47 and 52 of holidays. And that concludes our final project. Thank you.